It is now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, while the sun's light failed and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home, beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things.
You know, this is a squalid human story about power and control, about breaking human bodies in so much pain that no one among the living would dare step out of line. It's a story about mob violence and political cowardice and religious hypocrisy. It's about fear and greed and seeing how poorly we can treat each other. And sure, we can lift up little moments where the darkness isn't absolute, but honestly, they're pretty rare. There's no triumphal entry in this story. There's no waving of palm fronds or children singing Hosanna. There are no new members. There is no meal at a common table. There is certainly no ham tetrazzini made with love. And yes, there is one little bit left to read, but John will tell you, it does not get any better. Jesus' dead body is taken away, not by his brothers, not by his disciples, but by a stranger. He isn't buried in the family tomb, but by himself. And by the time the Sabbath is over, it will be too late to anoint his body. And frankly, the fact that we'll hear that they bought spices just means that everybody thinks this is the end of the line. Because we all know what happens to dead human bodies. So yeah. This is the story of COVID in Shanghai and the Russian retreat from Bucha and the political insanity in Washington. This is the story of the climate crisis and Alzheimer's and opioid addiction. This story is the miserable human story we have been telling for thousands of years. And yet, this is the story of Jesus of Nazareth. This is the story where God chose to reveal God's self to us. Not so that we would understand God or understand ourselves any better. We are just as violent and cowardly and hypocritical as ever. But this story is the one that God told so that we would know that while we don't understand, God does. And God forgives. And God promises us paradise. This is the story that invites us to stick around for just a little longer and see what happens. This is the story that says, maybe something will come out of Shanghai or Bucha or Washington that will be a new thing that will change the world. Not because of us, but because of God. which might make this